The morning sun hadn't quite burned off the coastal fog when Livia Marquez pulled into the employee lot at San Francisco International. Her old Honda sputtered to a stop beside a row of identical cars, each one carrying someone who, like her, was about to spend the next 14 hours pretending everything was fine. She took a slow breath, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and smoothed down the navy blue fabric of her uniform. The airline pin on her lapel was slightly crooked. She straightened it without thinking, the way she'd done thousands of times before. Inside the crew lounge, the air hummed with low chatter and the smell of reheated coffee. Livia nodded at a few familiar faces but kept to herself. She wasn't in the mood for small talk. Last night, she'd stayed up until 2 a.m., filling out insurance forms for her mother's latest round of physical therapy. The bills kept piling up, and the part-time job she'd picked up on weekends, teaching basic Spanish to retirees, barely made a dent. Flying used to feel like freedom. Now it just felt like another shift. Her flight today was a red-eye-turned morning departure, SFO to JFK, first-class heavy, mostly business travelers and a few well-heeled families heading east for the weekend. She'd flown this route so many times she could recite the safety demo in her sleep. Still, she reviewed the passenger manifest during pre-flight briefing. Routine, predictable, safe, or so she thought. Boarding began at 7:15 a.m. Livia stood at the forward galley, smiling politely as passengers filed past. Most didn't make eye contact. A few offered a quiet good morning. Then came a boy, maybe 10 or 11, wearing noise-canceling headphones and a slightly rumpled blazer. He carried a slim backpack and walked with the cautious confidence of someone used to being alone in adult spaces. An escort from the airline's unaccompanied minor program handed him off with a clipboard signature and a pat on the shoulder. Kalen Voss, the escort said quietly. Seat 2A, his father's in Singapore. Driver's meeting him at JFK. Livia gave a small nod. She'd seen kids like him before, wealthy, polished, used to 5-star treatment even at an age when most were still losing teeth. But this one seemed different. He didn't demand attention, didn't whine. Just slipped into his window seat, pulled out a sketchbook and started drawing with a mechanical pencil, his brow furrowed in concentration. The cabin filled quickly. First class on this flight was only 12 seats, arranged in a hushed, carpeted cocoon at the front of the plane. Livia moved through her service rhythm. Water, warm nuts, breakfast menus. She offered a warm towel to a woman in 1C who barely glanced up from her tablet. She refilled champagne for a man who muttered thanks without looking at her. It was all muscle memory now. Smile, serve, disappear. Kalen asked for orange juice, no pulp. When she brought it, he looked up and said, "Thank you," in a voice so soft it almost got lost in the hum of the engines. She was surprised by how earnest he seemed. Not entitled, just present. For the first hour, the flight was smooth. Clouds stretched endlessly below like a sea of cotton. Livia checked on passengers, cleared trays, adjusted cabin lighting. She stole a glance at Kalen once or twice. He'd finished his juice and was now sketching the wing, capturing the curve of the engine nacelle with surprising detail for someone his age. Then came the turbulence. It wasn't severe, just a sudden dip that made the seatbelt sign chime and sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. Livia was mid-aisle, balancing a tray of coffee mugs when the plane dropped sharply. She braced herself against a seatback, heart pounding. Most passengers gripped their armrests. Kalen, startled, jerked his hand and knocked over his half-finished glass of sparkling water. The glass tipped slowly, almost gracefully, spilling fizzy liquid across the polished wood tray table and onto the cream-colored seat cushion. Water dripped onto the floor. "Oh, sorry," Kalen said immediately, his face flushing. He grabbed a napkin and started dabbing at the mess, his movements quick and apologetic. Livia's first instinct was to reassure him. It was an accident. Turbulence happened, but something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the sleepless nights. Maybe it was the way her supervisor had scolded her last week for forgetting to offer a passenger their preferred brand of sparkling water. "We're not selling seats. Livia, we're selling perfection." Maybe it was the fact that she'd just spent 20 minutes calming a crying infant in economy while first-class passengers complained their croissants weren't warm enough. Whatever it was, it surged up like a wave she couldn't hold back. Without thinking, she reached out and swatted his forearm. Not hard, not enough to leave a mark, but sharp enough to stop him cold. "Watch what you're doing," she said. her voice low but edged with something unfamiliar even to herself. The words hung in the air. Kalen froze. His eyes widened. He didn't cry, didn't yell, just stared at her, stunned like he couldn't believe what had just happened. The napkin slipped from his fingers. Livia's stomach dropped. Oh God, what did I just do? She wanted to take it back, to say she was sorry. But the moment had passed and the weight of it pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. Around them, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. A woman in 1D looked away quickly. The man in 2C pretended to read his newspaper. No one said a word. Livia forced herself to keep moving. She grabbed a fresh towel, wiped up the spill with mechanical precision and placed a new glass of water on Kalen's tray, this time with a lid. She didn't meet his eyes. Couldn't. For the rest of the flight, she avoided row 2 entirely. She let her colleague Malik handle that side of the cabin. She busied herself with coffee refills, blanket adjustments, anything to keep her hands moving and her mind from circling back to that single, terrible second. Kalen didn't ask for anything else. He closed his sketchbook, put his headphones back on, and stared out the window for the rest of the flight. He didn't draw, didn't fidget, just sat there, small and quiet in his oversized seat, as if trying to disappear. When the plane touched down at JFK, Livia watched from the galley as the unaccompanied minor coordinator came aboard to collect him. Kalen gathered his things slowly, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and walked down the aisle without looking back. Not once. Only when the cabin was empty and the cleaning crew had started their sweep did Livia allow herself to exhale. Her hands were shaking. She leaned against the bulkhead, pressing her palms into her eyes. It wasn't that bad, she whispered to herself. He's fine. It was just a tap. But the lie tasted bitter. She thought about reporting it herself, owning up before someone else did. But fear won out. Fear of losing her job. Fear of the shame. Fear that no one would understand how tired she was, how stretched thin. How one bad moment could unravel everything. She told herself it was over. A blip. A mistake that would vanish into the thousands of other moments she'd lived in the sky. But as she walked through the terminal toward crew transport, she kept seeing his face. The shock, the silence, the way he'd gone utterly still. And deep down she knew, some things don't just disappear because you walk away from them. The sky outside was clear and bright over New York. Perfect flying weather. But inside Livia, a storm had begun to gather, one she couldn't outrun, no matter how many miles she put between herself and that quiet boy in seat 2A. The moment the cabin door closed behind the last passenger, the silence felt heavier than usual. Livia stayed in the galley pretending to count cutlery, just to avoid eye contact with the rest of the crew. She could feel Malik watching her from across the aisle. He hadn't said anything during the flight, not after the incident, not even when he took over serving Kalen's row, but his silence spoke louder than words. Malik had been flying for 8 years, long enough to know when something was off. He'd seen Livia stressed before. Everyone got frazzled on long hauls, but this was different. There'd been a sharpness in her voice, a tension in her shoulders he hadn't seen in years. And then there was the boy. Malik had noticed him right away. Polite, quiet, the kind of kid who said please without being prompted. When he saw Kalen flinch and go still after Livia's hand came down, Malik's gut twisted. He didn't witness the exact motion, just the aftermath, but he knew enough. During the post-flight debrief in the crew lounge at JFK, no one mentioned it. The lead flight attendant, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, ran through the usual checklist. Any medical issues? Passenger complaints? Special requests for the return leg? Everyone shook their heads. Livia kept her eyes on her coffee cup, but Malik waited. When the others drifted off to catch their shuttles or grab lunch, he lingered near Livia's seat. You okay? He asked, voice low. She looked up, startled, then quickly masked her expression. Yeah, just tired. He nodded slowly. That kid in 2A? He seemed shaken. Livia's fingers tightened around the cup. He knocked over his drink. I told him to be careful. Malik didn't push. He knew better. Instead, he said, his dad's Julian Voss. You know, the Voss Group. Tech stuff, satellites, all that. Livia blinked. I don't keep up with billionaires. No, Malik said gently, but they keep up with us. He left it at that. But the words stuck in Livia's mind like a burr as she rode the crew van back to the hotel. Julian Voss. The name meant nothing to her, but the implication did. People like that didn't forget things, especially not when their kids were involved. Back in her room, she tried to sleep. The hotel bed was too soft, the AC too loud. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kalen's face, the way his pencil had stopped mid-stroke, the way his breath had caught. She tossed and turned until 3 a.m., then gave up and called her mom. Her mother's voice, groggy but warm, was the only thing that grounded her. "Mia, you sound like you're carrying the whole sky on your back," her mom said. Livia almost told her. Almost. But she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. Not yet. Meanwhile, Kalen sat in the back of a black SUV, staring out the window as Manhattan's skyline rose in the distance. The driver, a quiet man named Ray who'd worked for the Voss family for over a decade, glanced in the rearview mirror. "You hungry, Kale?" Kalen shook his head. "Not really." Ray didn't press. He'd known Kalen since he was 5. The boy wasn't one to complain, but Ray could tell something was wrong. His usual chatter was gone. His sketchbook lay closed on his lap. When they reached the penthouse on 5th Avenue, Kalen went straight to his room. He didn't mention the flight, didn't say a word about the attendant, but that night, over a quiet dinner of miso-glazed cod and jasmine rice, he finally spoke. "Dad's gonna call tomorrow," he said, pushing rice around his plate. His older sister, Mira, looked up. "From Singapore?" "Yeah," she studied him. "Everything okay on the flight?" Kalen hesitated. Then, softly, "An attendant. She hit me." Mira set her fork down. "What do you mean, hit you?" "Not like punched me, but she smacked my arm. Because I spilled water." Mira's eyes narrowed. "Did you tell anyone?" "I told Malik." "The other attendant." "He gave me extra cookies and a blanket." Mira exhaled slowly. She knew better than to make a scene. Kalen hated that. But she also knew their father wouldn't let this go. Not when it came to his kids. The next morning, Julian Voss called. He didn't yell. He never did. But his voice carried a quiet intensity that made even seasoned executives sit up straighter. "Kalen told me what happened," he said to Mira over a secure line. "I need the airline's contact, not customer service, the head of in-flight operations." Mira sent the details without question. By noon, a call landed on the desk of Eleanor Cho, Senior VP of Customer Experience at Skyward Airlines. The caller ID read private. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Mr. Voss," she said after he introduced himself, her tone instantly shifting into polished professionalism. "To what do we owe the honor?" "I'm not calling for an honor," Julian said. "I'm calling because my 11-year-old son was physically disciplined by one of your flight attendants for spilling a drink." Eleanor's pen froze mid-note. I wasn't aware of any such incident." "Of course you weren't," Julian replied evenly. "Because no one reported it, but it happened, and I'd like to know what you intend to do about it." There was no accusation in his voice, just expectation, and that was far more unnerving. Within the hour, an internal alert pinged across Skyward's operations network. "High-priority passenger concern. First class, SFO JFK, Flight 422. HR was looped in. Legal was notified. The crew roster was pulled. Livia's name surfaced immediately. Back in San Francisco, Livia was home, trying to fold laundry while her mom dozed in the living room. Her phone buzzed. A message from Diane. "Call me when you're free." Her stomach dropped. She waited until her mom was asleep, then stepped onto the tiny balcony. Diane's voice was clipped. "Careful. Livia, we got a complaint from a passenger on your last flight. Alleges inappropriate physical contact with a minor." Livia's throat went dry. "It wasn't like that. He spilled." "Doesn't matter how it started." Diane cut in gently. "Policy is clear. Any physical contact with a passenger, especially a child, is grounds for immediate review. You're being placed on administrative leave effective now." "Leave? But just stay off the schedule. Don't come to the airport. HR will reach out." The call ended. Livia stood there, phone in hand, staring at the neighbor's overgrown bougainvillea. Administrative leave wasn't termination, but it might as well have been. No pay, no benefits. And the rumor mill would chew her up before she even had a chance to explain. At Skyward HQ, Eleanor convened an emergency meeting. Security pulled the audio logs from the cabin. First-class mics were always on, but the recording was muddy. Just the hiss of airflow, the clink of glassware, and then a sharp, muffled sound followed by silence. No clear words, no scream. But the pause afterward. It spoke volumes. Then Malik walked into HR's office. He didn't come as an accuser, he came as a witness. I saw it, he told the investigator. Not the hit itself, but right after. The kid looked terrified, and Livia, she looked like she wanted to vanish. He handed over a photo he'd taken discreetly before the boarding pass was thrown away. Kaylin's name, seat number, everything. She's a good person, Malik added, but she made a mistake, and that kid didn't deserve it. His testimony shifted the tone of the investigation from, was it real, to, what do we do now? Julian Voss, for his part, remained calm. He didn't post on social media, didn't call the press, but he did send one email to Skyward's CEO, a single paragraph that ended with, I expect a full review of your crew conduct policies, not just disciplinary action against one employee. That email landed like a stone in still water. Livia, meanwhile, sat on her couch scrolling through airline forums, her heart pounding every time her phone buzzed. She imagined headlines, Flight Attendant Assaults Child. She imagined losing her license, her home, her mom's care. But the days passed. No news vans, no angry tweets, just silence. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. Kaylin, back in New York, started drawing again. Not planes this time, but people. A woman with tired eyes. A man handing out blankets. A boy looking out a window, small but not broken. He didn't hate Livia. He was confused, yes, hurt maybe, but mostly he just wanted to understand why someone who was supposed to help had lashed out instead. And hundreds of miles away, Livia stared at her own reflection in the dark TV screen and asked herself the same question. The truth was, no one on that flight was just one thing. Not the billionaire's son, not the exhausted flight attendant, not even the quiet man in the SUV who remembered every birthday. They were all human, flawed, tired, trying to do their best in a world that rarely gave second chances. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you a moment to make things right. And that moment was coming. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Livia was heating up leftover soup for lunch. Her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Area code 212, New York. She almost didn't answer. These days, every unknown call felt like a threat, but something made her swipe. Hello? A man's voice, calm and measured, filled her ear. Ms. Marquez, this is Julian Voss. Her breath caught. The spoon in her hand clattered into the pot. She didn't speak. Couldn't. I'm calling about my son, he continued, as if they were discussing a missed delivery or a delayed meeting. Kaylin. Livia's throat tightened. Mr. Voss, Before you say anything, he interrupted gently. I want you to know I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm not calling to humiliate you. I've read the internal report. I've spoken with your colleague Malik. I've seen the cabin audio log. She swallowed hard. Then you know it wasn't what it sounds like. I know it was a moment, he said. A bad one. But it was still a moment where an adult used physical force on a child who made an honest mistake. Livia closed her eyes. I was exhausted. My mom's sick. I haven't slept through the night in weeks. That's not an excuse, I know that, but I wasn't thinking. It just happened. There was a pause on the line. Not judgmental, just quiet. I believe you, Julian finally said. And that's why I'm calling. She frowned. You believe me? Yes. Because I've been there. Not in your shoes, But in that place where you're so stretched thin, you snap at someone who doesn't deserve it. Maybe not a stranger, maybe my assistant, maybe my daughter. But it's happened. Livia didn't know what to say. She'd expected anger, lawyers, a public takedown. Not this understanding. I'm not asking for your job, he went on. I'm not asking for you to be fired. What I am asking is this. What kind of system lets someone get to that point without support? You've been flying for 15 years. You've served thousands of passengers. And yet when you were drowning, no one noticed until you lashed out. His words hit her like a wave, because he was right. No one had asked if she was okay. No one had checked in after her mom's diagnosis. The airline treated crew like cogs, replaceable, invisible, always expected to smile through the grind. I don't know what to do, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I, Julian said honestly. But I do know this. Punishment won't fix what happened. But maybe honesty can. He told her about Kalen, how the boy hadn't slept well for 2 nights after the flight, how he'd stopped drawing for a while, how he kept asking, "Was I bad?" He wasn't bad, Livia said quickly. He was perfect. Too perfect. That's what got to me. He was so polite, so quiet, and I took it out on him. Then maybe, Julian said, you owe him more than silence. They talked for another 10 minutes, not as billionaire and employee, not as accuser and accused, but as two parents who'd both failed someone they cared about in their own ways. Before hanging up, Julian made one request, that Livia agree to a mediated conversation, not with lawyers, but with a neutral third party, a child psychologist who specialized in restorative practices. No cameras, he promised. No recordings. Just you, me, Kalen if he's ready, and someone who can help us talk without tearing each other apart. Livia hesitated. The idea terrified her. Facing Kalen, admitting what she'd done out loud to his face. But the alternative, living with this guilt, waiting for the other shoe to drop, felt worse. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. At Skyward Airlines headquarters, the mood had shifted. Eleanor Cho, the VP of Customer Experience, had spent the last week in crisis mode. Legal wanted to cut Livia loose immediately. PR wanted a statement ready in case the story leaked. But then Julian Voss sent a second email, this one proposing a partnership. He offered to fund a new crew wellness program, confidential mental health support, fatigue management training, and mandatory check-ins for staff caring for sick relatives. In return, he asked only 2 things, that Livia be given a fair process, and that the airline revise its policy on handling unaccompanied minors in premium cabins. Because, as he wrote, a child shouldn't need a bodyguard to fly safely. It was unprecedented. Most high-profile complaints ended in lawsuits or settlements. This felt different. Human Eleanor brought the proposal to the executive board. There was resistance, some called it extortion by empathy, but the CEO, after a long silence, said, if Julian Voss wants to help us fix our culture instead of destroying our reputation, we'd be fools to say no. Meanwhile, Livia met with her union rep, a no-nonsense woman named Rosa, who'd flown the same routes decades ago. You're lucky, Rosa told her over coffee at a diner near the airport. Most passengers like him would have gone straight to the news. But this guy, he's giving you a chance to make it right. I don't deserve it, Livia said. Maybe not, Rosa replied, but you're taking it. That counts for something. She helped Olivia draft a formal apology, not for the airline's file, but for Kalen. Simple, direct, no excuses. Just, I hurt you. I'm sorry. I'm working to be better. The day before the mediation, Livia visited her mom. She didn't tell her everything, just that she'd made a mistake at work and was trying to fix it. Her mom reached out, her hand thin but steady, and squeezed Livia's. Mia, everyone stumbles. What matters is whether you get back up, and whether you help the person you knocked down get up too. That night, Livia dreamed of the flight again. But this time, when the glass tipped, she caught it. And Kalen looked at her and smiled. In New York, Kalen sat with the child psychologist Dr. Lin in a sunlit room filled with books and soft chairs. She didn't push him to talk, just asked how he felt about meeting Livia. I don't want her to be scared, he said after a while. I just want to know why. Dr. Lin nodded. Sometimes knowing the why helps the hurt fade. Julian watched from the hallway, arms crossed, heart in his throat. He'd spent his life solving problems with money, with power, with influence. But this required something softer, something he wasn't sure he had enough of. Patience. The morning of the mediation, Livia wore her uniform. Not the full kit, just the blouse, clean and pressed. Not as a flight attendant, but as a symbol of who she was trying to be again. She walked into a quiet conference room in a neutral office building in downtown San Francisco. Julian was already there, standing by the window. He turned when she entered. No anger in his eyes. Just quiet resolve. They didn't shake hands. Not yet. Dr. Lin greeted them both, her voice calm and steady. Today isn't about blame, she said. It's about understanding and healing. Kalen arrived 10 minutes later, holding his sketchbook. He looked small in the big chair, but his eyes were clear. When he saw Livia, he didn't flinch, just studied her, as if trying to match the person in front of him with the memory of the flight. Livia's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to disappear, but she stayed. Because for the first time since that moment at 35,000 feet, she wasn't running, she was ready to face what she'd done, and maybe, just maybe, begin to fix it. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the building's air system and the distant sound of city traffic outside. Livia sat with her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white. She kept her eyes down at first, not out of shame exactly, but because looking up felt too much like demanding forgiveness she hadn't earned yet. Julian sat across from her, calm, posture relaxed but alert. Kalen was beside him, legs swinging slightly under the table, sketchbook open but untouched. Dr. Lin, the mediator, sat at the head of the table, her presence steady like an anchor. "We're here," she began gently, "not to rehash every second of what happened on that flight, but to understand how it affected each of you and what might help move forward." She turned to Kalen first. "Would you like to say anything?" He hesitated, then nodded. I didn't mean to spill the water. The plane moved and my hand slipped. I said sorry right away." His voice was soft but clear. No anger, just honesty. Livia's chest tightened. "I know," she said, finally looking up. "And you were so polite about it. That's what made it worse, because you didn't deserve what I did." Kalen tilted his head slightly. "Why did you do it?" The question hung in the air, simple and heavy. Livia took a breath. She could have said, "I was stressed," or "I wasn't thinking," but those felt like shields, and right now she needed to be bare. "I was tired," she said slowly. "Not just from that flight. From months of feeling like I had to be perfect all the time, even when I was falling apart. My mom's been sick. I've been working extra shifts. And that morning, I woke up feeling like I couldn't carry one more thing. When the glass spilled, it wasn't about you. It was like the last straw on a back that was already breaking." She paused, voice catching. "But that's no excuse. You were a kid doing nothing wrong. And I used my hand like a weapon. That wasn't care. That was failure." Kalen was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Are you mad at me now?" The question surprised her. "No, never. I was never mad at you. I was mad at everything else, and I took it out on you. That's on me, not you." He nodded slowly, as if filing that away. Julian spoke for the first time. "Kalen asked me the same thing the night after the flight. Was I bad?" I told him no. "But kids believe actions more than words. What you did made him doubt himself," Livia swallowed. "I hate that." "I know," Julian said. "But hating it isn't enough. What are you going to do differently?" It wasn't an attack. It was a real question, one she'd been asking herself every night since. "I've started seeing a counselor," she said. "Through the union. I'm learning how to ask for help instead of pretending I'm fine. And I've signed up for the airline's new wellness program, the one your foundation helped create." Julian gave a small nod. He hadn't expected her to have answers, just willingness. Dr. Lin guided the conversation gently, making space for each person to speak without rushing, without judgment. At one point, Kalen pulled out a drawing from his sketchbook and slid it across the table. It was Livia, not as she was that day, tense and sharp, but as he imagined her standing in a sunlit airport, holding a cup of coffee, looking tired but kind. In the corner he'd written, "She's trying." Livia stared at it, tears welling. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded, pressing her lips together. After an hour, the session ended not with a grand resolution, but with quiet understanding. There were no promises of friendship, no dramatic hugs. Just three people who'd been hurt in different ways beginning to see each other clearly. Outside the building, Julian stopped before getting into his car. "You'll keep flying?" he asked Livia. "I hope so," she said. "Not long haul anymore. I've asked for shorter domestic routes so I can be home with my mom." "They're considering it." He studied her for a moment. "You made a mistake, but you didn't hide from it. That matters." Then, almost as an afterthought, "If you ever want to talk to Kalen again when he's ready, I won't stand in the way." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a door left open. Back home, Livia placed Kalen's drawing on her fridge, right next to a photo of her and her mom at the beach years ago. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter, not to Julian, not to the airline, but to herself. A promise: no more silence. No more pretending. Ask for help before you break. At Skyward Airlines, the changes began quietly. The new crew wellness program launched with optional counseling sessions, fatigue awareness workshops, and a confidential hotline staffed by former flight attendants who understood the grind. Supervisors were trained to spot signs of burnout, not just in performance, but in posture, tone, the way someone poured coffee. Livia wasn't the face of the program, but her story, anonymous, stripped of names, became part of the training module on emotional regulation. Not as a warning, but as a reminder, even the most experienced can crack under pressure. And that's human. She returned to work 3 weeks later, not to first class, but to a morning shuttle from Oakland to Denver. Short flight, small plane, fewer passengers. She wore her uniform with a new kind of pride, not because it made her look important, but because it meant she'd been given a second chance to serve with care. Not just compliance. Her first day back, she double-checked every drink order. She smiled with her eyes, not just her mouth. And when a toddler on board dropped a sippy cup, she knelt down, cleaned it up, and said, "Happens to the best of us," with a warmth that felt real. Meanwhile, in New York, Kalen started flying again. Not alone this time. Mira accompanied him on a trip to visit their grandmother in Seattle. He watched the flight attendants closely, not with fear but curiosity. One of them noticed and asked if he liked planes. "I like people who fly them," he said. She laughed. "We're just regular folks with good shoes," he smiled. And for the first time since that flight, he opened his sketchbook mid-air and started drawing. Julian, watching from his seat, felt a quiet relief. Healing wasn't instant. It wasn't neat, but it was happening. He also made a call to his foundation's director. "Let's expand that wellness grant," he said. "Not just for Skyward, for every major carrier. If one person's breaking point can spark change, let it mean something bigger." Back in California, Livia's mom had good days and hard days. But now Livia didn't carry it all alone. She'd joined a support group for adult children caring for aging parents. She'd even taken one evening off to watch the sunset at the marina, something she hadn't done in years. One night, as they sat on the porch sharing a bowl of mango slices, her mom said, "You seem lighter." Livia leaned back in her chair. "I'm not fixed, but I'm trying." "That's all anyone can ask," her mom said, patting her hand. The truth was, no one walked away from that flight unchanged. Livia learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise when you do. Kalen learned that adults make mistakes too, and sometimes they're brave enough to say sorry. And Julian learned that power isn't just about fixing problems from the top. It's about listening from the ground up. There were no headlines, no viral videos, no courtroom drama, just ordinary people choosing again and again to do better. And in a world that often rewards outrage, that quiet choice to face your fault, to offer grace, to build something kinder from the wreckage, was the most extraordinary thing of all. 6 months after that flight from San Francisco to New York, Livia stood in the middle of a high school gymnasium in Oakland, adjusting the collar of her navy blue blazer. It wasn't her airline uniform. This one was newer, softer, bought with part of her first paycheck back after her leave. Around her, teenagers milled about, some shy, some buzzing with nervous energy, all wearing name tags and clutching notebooks. They were part of a youth aviation outreach program, and today Livia was their guest speaker. She hadn't planned to do this, but after returning to flying, something had shifted. She found herself watching the young passengers more closely. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. She remembered how Kalen had drawn the wing with such care, how he'd looked at the clouds like they held secrets. It made her wonder how many kids loved the sky but never saw someone who looked like them in the cockpit or the galley. So, when the outreach coordinator reached out, asking if any crew members would be willing to talk to students about careers in aviation, Livia said yes, before she could talk herself out of it. Now, standing in front of 30 wide-eyed teens, she didn't talk about safety procedures or in-flight service. She talked about tired days, about making mistakes, about learning to ask for help. I used to think being strong meant never showing weakness, she told them, voice steady. But real strength is knowing when you're about to break and reaching out before you do. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Did you ever think about quitting? Livia smiled faintly. Every time my alarm went off at 3 a.m. But then I remembered why I started, because I loved seeing the world from above and helping people feel safe while they did. Even when it's hard, that part still matters. After the talk, a few students lingered. One boy, maybe 12, with thick glasses and a backpack covered in airplane stickers, approached her shyly. My mom's a nurse, he said. She's always tired too. Do you think she'd be mad if I told her it's okay to rest? Livia knelt slightly so they were eye level. I think she'd be relieved someone finally gave her permission. He nodded like he'd been carrying that question for a long time. Later that afternoon, as Livia walked to her car, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification from the Voss Family Foundation. She almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. The message was brief. No signature, just a line. Your talk today was shared with our education team. We'd like to include your program in our next round of grants. Let us know if you're open to a call. At the bottom was a note in smaller font. Kalen says hi. He's flying solo again next month. He asked if you'd be on his flight. Livia read it 3 times. Then she leaned against her car and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Not because she expected to be on that flight. Schedules were random after all, but because the fact that he'd asked, it meant he wasn't afraid anymore. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she drove home, made tea, and sat on the porch with her mom, who was feeling stronger these days thanks to a new therapy routine Livia could finally afford. Good day? Her mom asked. The best kind, Livia said. Quiet but full. She didn't mention the email. Some things were too tender to say out loud just yet. Meanwhile, in New York, Kalen stood on the balcony of their penthouse, sketchbook in hand. Below, the city pulsed with light and motion. He wasn't drawing buildings tonight. He was sketching a woman in a uniform standing beside a plane looking up at the sky, not with exhaustion, but with something like peace. His sister Mira came out with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Still thinking about flying next week? Yeah, he said. I hope she's there. You really liked her, huh? Even after? Even after, he said simply. Because she said sorry like it meant something. Mira ruffled his hair. You're a good kid, you know that? He shrugged, but he was smiling. Julian watched them from the doorway, arms crossed, heart full in a way he hadn't expected. He'd built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, stood on stages with world leaders, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet pride of watching his son choose kindness over bitterness. He'd kept his word. The wellness initiative he'd helped launch was now active in 5 major airlines. Early reports showed fewer crew burnout incidents, higher retention, and most importantly, more open conversations about mental health in an industry that had long treated it as weakness. He hadn't done it for praise. He'd done it because Kalen had asked, why didn't anyone help her before she hurt someone? And Julian realized, systems should protect everyone, not just the passengers in first class. Back in California, Livia returned to flying, but differently. She no longer chased the long international routes that paid more but stole her nights. She chose morning flights that got her home by dinner. She took real breaks between trips. And when she felt the old tension rising, the tightness in her shoulders, the shortness in her voice, she excused herself to the galley, breathed, and asked a colleague to cover for 5 minutes. No one judged her. In fact, more and more crew members were doing the same. One evening, as she walked through the terminal after a short hop to Portland, she passed a family heading to their gate. The little boy was dragging his feet, exhausted. His mom looked frazzled, juggling a diaper bag and a coffee. Livia slowed, then turned. Need a hand? She asked gently. The mom looked surprised, then grateful. Just Surviving. We've all been there, Livia said, taking the diaper bag. Gate B12? They walked together. Small talk, shared smiles, nothing grand. Just human. At the gate, the boy looked up at her. Are you a pilot? No, she said, smiling. I help people get where they're going safely. He nodded seriously. That's important. It is, she said. And so is being kind when things get messy. She handed back the bag, waved, and kept walking. But the exchange stayed with her. This was why she'd stayed. Not for the miles, not for the uniform, but for these tiny moments of connection that reminded her she wasn't just serving passengers. She was part of their story, and they were part of hers. Months turned into a year. The incident on Flight 422 never made the news. There were no lawsuits, no viral outrage, no career-ending scandal. Just a ripple that spread quietly through policies, conversations, and choices. Livia never saw Kaylin again, though she heard through Malik that he'd flown solo several times since, always polite, always sketching. Once, Malik even showed her a photo someone had taken at JFK, Kaylin handing a drawing to a flight attendant, both of them smiling. She kept that image in her mind like a compass. Life didn't magically fix itself. Her mom still had bad days. Bills still piled up. Some flights were still grueling. But now, Livia carried a different kind of weight, one made of lessons learned, not regrets hoarded. And in the end, that made all the difference. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a future where the same mistake doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone else.